Good evening. You're very welcome to this week's edition of Centre Ground. And tonight the spotlight is on the EPA. From Cork Environmental Alliance, I'll be speaking to Derry Chambers, and from Limerick Against Pollution, Claire Keating, and Cappagh Farmers Support Group is represented tonight by Pat Geoghegan. So first up, I'm going to chat to Derry Chambers from Cork Environmental Alliance. Derry, you are very welcome to Centre Ground, and thank you for agreeing to chat to us this evening.
Thank you, Anna. A pleasure.
Well, maybe you might begin by telling us a little bit about the Environmental Protection Agency, what it is and how it came about.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to speak about the Environmental Protection Agency and to separate it from planning, because that's what happened when it was set up. Prior to the establishment of the EPA, there was the companies that are now licensed by the EPA were looked after by each local authority in each county. Excuse me. And in Cork, as you know, Cork was the centre of the pharmaceutical industry, and that the first company to come here was Pfizer's that came in 1969. Then they were followed very quickly after that by other companies, and we were having problems in the harbour. No, they didn't come here because the usual thing, because we're well educated and all this rubbish that you hear from the politicians. They were fleeing the USA because the USA had set up an environmental protection agency there, and they didn't want to comply with the emission limits, the pollution limits that were being put on them there. So they came to Ireland, which also gave them a foothold in the EU, or the EEC as it was at the time. Now, there were many problems then with, the councils were totally ill-equipped to deal with the pollution arising from these companies. And after 5 or 6 years of then 5 or 6 years after they came in, they were being dealt with specifically with just planning laws. There were no pollution laws as such. And in 1977, the Air Pollution Act was passed, and that required companies such as Pfizer's and others to secure an air pollution license. A water pollution license was 77. And then in 87, the Air Pollution Act was passed. So, I mean, we were very late getting into the game of controlling pollution. And that caused many problems in the harbour and many scares about the health impacts of these emissions, which by their nature are, in many cases, quite dangerous to human health or to public health. We campaigned at that stage then. I mean, we had a headline one time on as it was then, the Cork Examiner, schoolyard awash with vomit. That was in Monkstown Primary School. All the kids got sick because of an emission from a plant. Now, they were all clustered together in the harbour, so which one had done it was impossible to tell. So the council ended up prosecuting 3 different companies. 2 fought it, 1 pleaded guilty and were fined, and the charges against the others were dropped. And because of all these kind of things, we were campaigning for an environmental protection agency, which in hindsight wasn't the wisest thing we ever did, because we got one. And the outcome, the way things stand now, is the planning situation, the local authority and then on board Canola will grant planning permission to build a facility, and then it gets a license from the EPA, which is, it's a bit of a joke really, because, for instance, we're dealing with an incinerator at the moment by Endeavour, which is a long-running thing. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But they now have planning permission at the moment, and it's held up because it's in the High Court. But if they build their plant and spend 200 million quid building it, it is highly unlikely that the EPA will turn around to them then and say, look, we're not going to give you a license, because the EPA are over a barrel then. And it was a very neat way of, prior to the establishment of the EPA, we could object in the planning system on environmental grounds. We can't do that anymore. So we're strictly on planning issues now, roads, that access, all that sort of thing. So more often than not, our grounds for objecting to a facility is limited by the fact we can't talk about the environment. Then they get planning permission. Then they build the whatever they've applied for, whatever factory or chemical plant or incinerator in this case. And it's almost impossible. How are we supposed to stop them getting there is no situation where the EPA would then refuse to give them a license to operate that plant after they're spending that much money, So,
okay, if I can just hold you there, I think we might be able to get up a video that might explain a little bit about the campaign to try and halt the building of an incinerator in Cork Harbour. I think that Stephen might actually have that video ready to roll now.
Burning our waste is a bad deal for our community and for our planet.
Incinerators have an amazing appetite. They've got to keep going flat out. And if there's not enough waste delivered locally, then it has to be imported.
When you burn wastes, it's a big mixture of many, many things, including synthetic materials like plastics, heavy metals, radioactive materials. And when you set fire to them, you don't destroy them and make them disappear. You just change the form that they're in, and you turn them into gas and ash and particles. Nobody disputes these days that being exposed to high levels of particles is actually injurious to your health.
Incineration is going in the opposite direction to a circular economy. The linear economy is extraction of raw materials, transporting them around the world, manufacturing products, consuming those products, throwing them away to produce waste. If you simply burn that waste, you are the ultimate act of the linear society. If you want to get to the circular economy, you've got to abandon incineration and start recovering resources.
Enormous financial forces are pressuring government, pressuring the people in government. And government know that they have to deal with waste, and so we can change our habits. We are the people that industry is selling to. If we say we don't want that, they're going to change.
So what we need to do is to get into a virtuous circle, which means that if something is being produced that is problematic, we phase that out, we substitute it with things that are much more sustainable, recyclable, reusable, and which have much less impacts on the planet and on our own health. And then if you do that, then you don't need incinerators.
So, Derry, one of the issues, one of the really big issues is the fact that there is a transfer of personnel from private industry over to the EPA. So you might like to tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, because we're a very small country, there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between regulatory bodies and industry. It's a very, sort of environmental science. The areas that regulators would work in would also be the fields that are in, would be open to them. The only other place that's open to them in Ireland is back in the industry. And we have had situations where, we have many situations where there's an interchange of personnel. For instance, going back right to the beginning of the EPA, when it was established in 1993, within 2 or 3 weeks, there was an explosion in a chemical plant in Cork Harbour. Hickson's, it blew up and it cost 45 million pounds worth of damage to their own plant, and dumped a load of toxic waste or toxic chemicals, or they didn't dump it, but it's built into Cork Harbour. The environmental officer with the council, or with Hickson's at the time, had previously been an environmental officer with Cork County Council regulating the industry. Then he moved to the industry, and now he's back with Cork County Council as a senior executive engineer with Cork County Council. And that sort of movement between them goes on all the time, And it's not healthy, it's not a sensible way of regulating industry.
We've had the situation with Mary Kelly, in the EPA?
Yeah, well, Mary Kelly started in IBEC working in promoting incineration. She then moved to the EPA and was supposed to be impartial and objective there. You know, I'm sure she was. But I mean, bear in mind, her previous job had been promoting incineration. Then she moved to Bord Pleanála and became chair of Bord Pleanála. She's just very recently retired. We've also had the project manager for Endeavour, the company who are trying to build the incinerator in Cork Harbour. She started off as project manager for the incinerator company for the proposal of Cork Harbour.
Laura Burke,
yeah.
yes.
And now she is Director General of the EPA. And, you know, it seems that we're not playing on a very level playing pitch, you know. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions on these people's integrity or anything, but it would be, how can I say, they have far more in common with the companies than they have with the people who bear the consequences of those companies. And you must remember that when the EPA issue a pollution license, that license is worth millions and millions of pounds because effectively it's giving the company permission to dump on your community, to pollute your community. It's making it legal what they do to your community. And we know from countless studies that what comes out the stack of an incinerator, for instance, is highly dangerous. And unless it's regulated well, and it hasn't been, I mean, there are many incinerators, in-house incinerators working in the harbour over the years. And there are major health problems in Cork Harbour. Now, we've never had a health study despite 40 years of asking for one. But I mean, there's the perception that there are health problems. I mean, the cancer rate in Cove, for instance, is over 40% above the national cancer rate. It's 40% above that. Cove is right next to 400 meters off the coast, or off the seafront in Cove. The county council and the EPA between them over the years allowed 2 million tonnes of toxic waste to be dumped into Cork Harbour. It's sitting there in the harbour now, forming part of Haulbowline Island. But this is for, there's things like chromium-6, PCBs, cesium-137, dioxins. They're all in there, and all the heavy metals. 2 million tonnes of it sitting there. And
okay, well, Derry, you know, the more I talk to you, the more I realise that we could dedicate an entire programme to this. And I'm very conscious that we have other people that we want to speak to. Just to finish off, Derry, what is the situation now with Endeavour and the proposal to build that incinerator in Cork Harbour?
Well, they applied first in the year 2001. They announced their plans in 2000. We've had 3 planning appeal hearings before on Bord Pleanála. In each case, the inspector, that is the person appointed by Bord Pleanála to chair the hearing, has ruled in our favour. But the board, the people like Mary Kelly and so on, they overruled their own inspector and allowed the project to go ahead in each of the 3 cases. At the moment, the 3rd time they've got it, it's now, that was in 2016. It was heard, we objected to the High Court in 2018, and we're still awaiting a decision on that. In the meantime, Endeavour have submitted an application to the EPA for a licence to run this incinerator, but the EPA are just sitting on it and will do nothing until the High Court makes a decision, you know.
Okay, and so that's where it is at the minute.
Fighting that, you know.
Okay, well, Derry, thank you so much, and we'll be coming back to you later in the programme. I should have said at the outset that our weekly panel discussion is anchored by Marion McGowan, and tonight we'll be discussing the government roadmap and who is going to profit from it. So Claire Keating is going to speak to us tonight on behalf of Limerick Against Pollution. And Limerick Against Pollution is an environmental group that's campaigning against the proposal to incinerate waste in the spent roadstone holding plant on the outskirts of Limerick City. So Claire has just come on screen. Claire, you're very welcome to Centre Ground, and thank you so much for agreeing to chat to us this evening.
No, thank you, Anna.
Yeah, maybe we could begin in a moment or two by looking at a video. It's a video of the most recent march that you held in Limerick City against this proposal to incinerate the waste. And I do believe that JP McManus was one of the people who attended that march.
Yeah, that's correct, Anna.
What do we want? Clean air! 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 What do we want? Clean air!
JP, why are you here today?
I'm concerned.
I know it's raining today, but at least the people are still coming out. Are you happy, JP, that people are coming out representing our city?
Yeah, listen, the people in Limerick are great, and you know, we're here to support them.
Thank you, JP. Thank you.
Limerick City, fall of grace! EPA, you're a disgrace!
It barely copes with the amount of people it has at the moment. How is it going to manage with all the people who get emphysema, lung cancer, lung diseases of all kinds from the toxic fumes that this company, to save 105 jobs, they're going to just pollute the atmosphere? It's completely wrong.
If we don't do this now, we're going to have terrible air quality, and it's part of, like I said up there, it's part of climate injustice. And we have to respect everyone, we have to respect the people, and we're just not doing that at the moment. Well, not we, obviously, but the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, our government is just ignoring us has been ignoring us for too long, and now we have to stand up and fight back.
So thanks to everyone for coming in horrendous weather conditions, and we were delighted with the turnout. We think there was around 6,000 people here, which is fantastic.
So, Claire, your story is quite similar to that of Derry in that you're both campaigning against incineration. When did your woes begin in Limerick?
It all started for us back in May 2015 when we realised that Irish Cement had made an application to Limerick City and County Council to change from what they're using currently, which is petroleum coke, the fossil fuel, and they now want to turn towards alternative fuels. 90,000 tonnes to be precise. So they made an application to Limerick City and County Council, and we got wind of that, and that is how we came about. So we basically came about as a result of a lack of trust in mechanisms that were supposed to protect public health and the well-being of the residents of Limerick City and County, and also along the Shannon Estuary into County Clare. So that's how we were formed, and we have been going ever since. That's 5 years now, Anna.
Right. And at a huge cost, I take it.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, we're just regular people that came together because we just we decided that somebody has to get up and fight this application, because it can't happen. You're talking about an area where there's 3 new primary schools, 2 secondary schools, 20,000 people living within a 3-kilometre radius. And what they're planning to do is quite dangerous, like incinerate toxic waste in that vicinity. And we've had the likes of Professor Paul Connacht on board. We've had him twice to make presentations to on board Planola, and he's also written to the EPA as well about the dangers of incineration and the dangers to public health in terms of dioxins and furans forming and accumulating in the food chain, and the dangers that it does pose to people. So that's been our campaign. We are all about raising awareness and letting the people know that this is actually happening. And we've been successful and up to date in terms of getting a lot of people on board and a lot of recognition for what we've been doing. So we've had a lot of public protests, and we've had the likes of JP McManus come and sit at our 4-day oral hearing that we had back in 2017 at the Onboard Planola, and he's also been present at our most recent march as well, along with other people, as you say, like Paul O'Connell and others that have come along to support it, because none of us want this application to go ahead.
And where exactly, Claire, is the application at the minute?
So the licence was granted September 2019 by the EPA. And we objected to the licence, and we requested an oral hearing. So what we've done, they announced that they would give us an oral hearing, which was meant to happen in May May, June, but as a result of COVID, the whole thing has been postponed until probably the next year, we think. So we're waiting at the moment for a date from the EPA with regard to the oral hearing. So we're going to there's about 15 different objectors that have requested the oral hearing. I'll just give you a quick outline of who they are. Like, you have everybody from members of Metropolitan District, Limerick City and County Council. You have Clare County Council. You have a lot of the schools, parents associations. We also have Sue Ann Foley, who's the daughter of Mr. McManus. We have the likes of Kieran O'Donnell. We have Willie O'Dea. We have Michelle Hayes, who's an environmental solicitor, and of course ourselves, Limerick Against Pollution, who are leading the campaign to stop this from going ahead. And we are going to continue probably down the same road as Chase, which is a judicial review. If the decision is not overturned, that's where we're going to end up, is the High Court.
Right. So basically what we have tonight now is a group in Cork and a group in Limerick that are fighting incineration and the granting of licenses to these big multinational corporations to conduct incineration. And I suppose that is a huge threat to our health, to air quality and to water quality. Claire, thank you so much for giving us that update. And we'll be coming back to you later on in the programme. My next guest tonight is Pat Geoghegan from Cappagh Farmers Support Group. And I have known Pat now for about 15 years. Himself and his wife Nuala are tireless campaigners. And indeed, they have been very hard done by the state. Back in the 1990s, RTE did an expose on animals and cattle dying in the fields along the Shannon estuary around Askeaton. There was a massive outcry across the country at that time, and it led to an EPA investigation. And as part of that EPA investigation, the health board took blood samples from the Geoghegan family. And it's there now that I'm going to take up the story with Pat. Pat, you're very welcome to Centre Ground.
Hi, Anna. How are you doing?
Now, Pat, perhaps you'll take up the story where yourself and your family provided blood samples for that EPA investigation into animal health in the Shannon Estuary area.
Well, back in the 1997 to 1999, Anna, there was an inquiry set up by the state. The Department of Agriculture were investigating the animal problems on the farm, the EPA regarding emissions, and you had the health board for human health. And like, we were in an awful state at the time because our livelihood had been destroyed, our health had been destroyed, and so were our animals. And we were delighted that the state took interest and set up this investigation, but we soon realised that the state wasn't on our side, it was on the side of the industry. Because during that investigation, the EPA had made public statements that the problems were gone when they came to Askeaton. That was not correct. The problems were so bad on our farm, it was unbelievable. Our animals were being burned by caustic, they were inhaling it, their airways were being damaged, their lungs were being damaged, they had ulcers in them. There was cows that were aborting. There was calves that were dead in the womb of the cows. The smell out of them was unreal. And our trees was being burned. Everything was being burned. Our health problems were getting worse. My wife, Nuala, suffered 3 miscarriages during it. I remember one of the worst days in our life was we found the smell in the yard. She had already gone into our late doctor and she was told that she was pregnant. Like, the news was unbelievable. We were delighted. 4 days after being told that, I found her on her knees next to the hay barn after inhaling something. The pain in her stomach was unreal. And a week later, the scan was done and the baby was gone. And we looked for help from everyone in the system. They played the fool in it as if they didn't know what to do. The EPA came out to our farm. They didn't want to know. They wouldn't even look down at the industry in case that they'd lay blame to it. They tried to blame us for our problems, what we were using in the milking machine, cleaning it up. They even blamed if there was a plane in the area. You know, they couldn't rule anything out, but they couldn't rule the industry in question as being the problem. Now, during that as well, we said we'd give in samples. The health board didn't want to know about getting any samples. So we said, look, why not take in samples and see what's in them, see are we telling the truth? You know, we're trying to protect our family. Our daughter at the time, Amanda, suffered huge problems. She collapsed in the field one day, pains in her joints, we had to lift her, took her into the regional hospital. There was 5 vials of blood taken from her. There was blood samples taken from me before a suspected heart attack that I got from the inhaling pollution, and same from my wife. Like we gave in 20 samples in all, and there was blood, urine, hair, nasal swabs, everything we gave that we could give after every episode of pollution during the Keating investigation, and we were told that they were being tested and they had gone away and everything. And then we got a letter from Dr. Kevin Kelleher, who headed up the investigation one day in '99 to tell us that all our samples were gone. Like, the evidence that we had against this company, which the state needed to prove if pollution was involved in the area, suddenly gone missing. Now,
okay, so if I could just move you on quickly, Pat. The EPA published a 200-page report, said that the farmers were to blame, that the pollution in the area, there was no pollution in the area that was contributing to the health of the animals. And then there was a public meeting in Keating, a very heated public meeting in Keating. Tell me about that.
Well, Dr. Kevin Kelleher, who headed up the Keating investigation on the health side, has said that our samples were not part of the investigation. Like, they couldn't be part of any other investigation, only the Keating investigation, because there were evidence taken in. Like, they did everything possible to break away the samples that they were gone missing. That was it. They moved to grant their license, and that's the way they kept it. We went to Micheál Martin when he became Minister for Health, and Micheál Martin said yes, he'd investigated the whole lot, and we met him two to three times in the Dáil, and we were getting an investigation into an internal inquiry that, thanks to Justine McCarthy at the time, who forced the Health Board to investigate themselves. So it was hard to know which one the cover-up was worse, whether it was the samples going missing or how the internal inquiry investigated the missing samples and the people involved. But we found out later that the internal inquiry that Minister Martin had proposed for the three-man commission had been stopped. And we protested. We're 20 years at it, Anna. We went up to the Health Board. We protested outside it, and we are not stopping because we know there's a cover-up. There's high officials within the Department of Health being protected, and Minister Martin at the time, and his Taoiseach now, I would call on him now to make a statement in regard to certain meetings that he had and why there wasn't any minutes kept of those meetings and who he met to decide to change and stop us getting our public inquiry, which we should have got at the time. And we would still fight, Anna. We need to fight not alone for ourselves, but for the people of Keating and for other communities like in Cork, like in Limerick, because this is what's going to happen. There's a protocol out there, it's called the Keating Protocol. So Derry Chambers said there tonight, or with Chase or whatever, if that incinerator goes ahead, the same with Clare, these are the same people are going to be on the bus, that'll come into your area and they will cover up no matter what.
Okay, so Pat, I'm intimately involved with your case and I know it very well. Just to make it very clear to our listeners, the internal investigation conducted by the Health Board into the missing samples said that they went missing before they went to the laboratory. But then under Freedom of Information, Pat and Nuala got documentation to show that the results of the samples were discussed internally within the health board after they came back from the laboratory. So this would contradict the findings of that investigation into the missing samples, and it was arising from that Pat then approached Micheál Martin when he was Minister for Health in 2003, I think it was, to calling for an inquiry. And he called for an inquiry when Leo Varadkar was Minister for Health, and more recently Dr. Harty, the independent TD for Clare, has called for Simon Harris to conduct a public inquiry into the missing samples, Simon Harris, when he was Minister for Health. So Pat, just to finish up now, you live quite close to Aithneach Alumina. Tell our viewers a little bit about Aithneach Alumina.
Where they produce alumina, and they leave a waste behind them is called red mud. There's 450 acres of it. It's 140 times the size of Croke Park. It's open to the elements. There's 50 million tons of toxic waste. Just sections of it just blows into the air. Getting back to Derry Chambers there, Limerick County Council granted planning permission at the time of Frank Dunlop was involved, and they granted permission without 170 acres of the first pond never been lined. So that means that the toxic waste has been seeping into Shannon since 1983. Now, if I was to tell you now, is the problem gone? No, Anna, it's not gone. It's as bad as ever. We can't walk in our farm. We get caught for bread. It burns our throat. You have to stop because you think you're getting a heart attack, and I've got a heart attack from it already. And the problem is these people have been protected by the state. And once you're protected by the state, you can get up in the morning and you can do absolutely whatever you like to do. And you can pollute, and it means nothing anymore of human health. They think nothing of it.
Okay, Pat. Maybe just to finish up now, Stephen might be able to bring up a video. It was actually shot from the air that will give us an aerial view of the mud ponds adjacent to Aithneach Alumina containing idea. How many acres did you say, Pat?
And there's 450 acres in total. And if you look at the pond closest to the plant has 170 acres of that never lined. So can you imagine? And when people come in on planes to Shannon, they look down on it and they can't believe what they're seeing, that there is a toxic waste like this in Ireland. We don't have a green image anymore. The EPA has destroyed that. The whole government has destroyed that. And I don't think we're ever going to get it back. We certainly won't get it back in West Limerick. And this red mud may now be taken into Limerick and put into an incinerator there, because that is one of the products that's going to be used in there is red mud. So they definitely won't bring it in from some other country when they have it down the road. And we know what that red mud is going to do to the people of Limerick.
Yes, so what you're referring to there is the proposal to incinerate that in Irish cement, in the Irish cement plant, and that's the issue that we have been talking to Claire about earlier. Well, thank you so much, Pat. We'll be coming back to you in a little while. And so now this brings us to the hot topic of the week, and as always, Marion McGowan is our anchor, and she will introduce what she feels is the number one burning issue that hit the media this week. So, Marion, you're very welcome to Centre Ground. What is the burning issue of the week?
Hi, Anna. Thanks very much. Well, the burning issue for the week for me is certainly around who's profiting and who's benefiting. Let me just give you a frame of reference for that. Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Capitalism. It's a book written by Naomi Klein, who was a Canadian author and activist back in 2007. And she argued that neoliberal or the free market policies have risen in many countries, and they've risen to prominence because there is a deliberate strategy of governments at the time to take advantage of crises and introduce what she calls shock therapy. Let me just give you a quick overview of that, because I'm going to have a look at, well, how does what we are living right now fit in with her thesis around that? Because she used the term shock doctrine to describe the brutal tactic of using the public disorientation and shock following a collective shock or crisis. And they used that time to push through radical pro-corporate measures, often called shock therapy. And this is how power profits from crisis and increases the inequality gap, which is the hallmark of neoliberalism. So I'm looking at, in his announcement of a suite of measures to deal with the C-19 crisis back in April, our Taoiseach then, Leo Varadkar, he assured us that, quote, "We are all in this together, and nobody in any walk of life should seek to be better off or seek to make a profit out of this crisis." Well, let's have a look at how that commitment has actually stacked up in reality some 6 months on. I'm going to use 3 examples. Number one, we were all terribly relieved to see that we had finally eliminated the 2-tier health system we have here, we suffer here in Ireland, when it was announced that private hospitals were going to be taken into use. Well, the 100 million we paid each month to the 18 private hospitals went to companies owned by religious orders, foreign investors, 2 billionaires, a vulture fund, and a private backer. And it should really be noted that the amount that we paid is well above, I think it was estimated to be 4 times higher than private hospitals were charging the UK's NHS. So let's look at the other measure, which was a relief when we heard it, but we have to get behind that. We were all going to have a payment holiday on our mortgages, a moratorium. However, it emerged that it isn't a moratorium at all, because it's going to end in September by all means. But what we're actually looking at here is, no, it's just we've stopped charging you, and we're going to add that onto the life of your mortgage. And what we're going to do is we're going to charge interest on the interest accrued during this 6 months. So they're actually charging interest on the interest, and that should amount to about £2,000. Work out the maths, but it's, you know, fair. Hello. Last thing I wanted to talk to you about was, look, the emergency powers. We've seen them, and these powers are used to introduce the civil law and criminal law bill, and essentially this allows vulture funds to use photocopies as evidence in eviction court cases, and this has never been seen. The emergency legislation was used to put that through. There is much controversy over, well, was this an emergency? No, it wasn't. But essentially, Pierce Doherty describes that legislation as rolling out the red carpet to vulture funds. So there's 3 examples. And let me finish up by giving you a quote from People Before Profits, Richard Boyd Barrett. He basically says that, look, this is a time we're giving far too much power to our government, who are using ill thought through and incoherent, unfair legislation, and using that legislation to turn regulation into criminal acts. So it's time this much stop. That's a paraphrase of it. So my question I put to our guests and yourself is, just taking into account this concept of shock therapy, are we actually experiencing that now? I know that a lot of people were in shock, having had to wade through the confusion of last night's new roadmap announcement. But my question I put out to you is, are we being subjected to this idea of shock therapy here? And is there a deliberate, in other words, attempt to slip through unpopular measures that will benefit corporate investors, and slip through legislation as well that will benefit corporate investors? And quite frankly, are we all in this together? I don't think so. Some more than others, perhaps.
Marion, I just want to thank you for that excellent expose on what is happening. Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, governments using something like a pandemic as an excuse to feather the nest of their corporate cronies. Maybe I'll bring in Derry here. And Derry, do you think that there is kind of a link to what is happening now with COVID and what you spoke to me about earlier on in the programme about how the state will always allow corporate bodies to profit at the expense of human health and so on?
Well, I mean, yeah, in shock doctrine, she gives the example, Naomi Klein gives the example of New Orleans after Katrina. And how now that almost all of the public schooling there now is in private hands, you know, and of course they're going to use, this Varadkar nonsense that we're all in this together. I mean these are just words they say, you know. This is Terry Prone talk, you know. But is someone in a meat factory, someone working on minimum wage in a meat factory for Larry Goodman, or someone in the direct provision centre? Are they in it in the same way as say Larry Goodman himself, whose private hospitals? He was one of the people that made fortune out of the private hospitals. Aer Lingus is a prime example. At the moment, Aer Lingus have most of their workforce, practically all of their workforce, on part-time working, and for the past 3 months they've been on part-time 2 days a week or something like that. And Aer Lingus are refusing to release the paperwork which would enable these people to claim welfare for the other part of their working week. So they're all surviving. These are people with mortgages, with jobs, the same as all of us. And they've responsibilities for their kids and whatever. And they're trying to exist on less than £200 a week. And because Aer Lingus won't release the necessary papers for them to sign on the dole for the other couple of days, everyone is suffering. So, but obviously the plan of Aer Lingus is, because the airline industry is pretty scuppered at the moment and it won't be recovering, next month or anything. It's in for the long haul. It's in trouble for the long haul. Aer Lingus are trying to force much of their workforce to just pack in and go full-time on the dole to avoid paying them redundancies, and it's simple, cynical things like that. And that's just a tiny example of how in times of crisis or perceived crises, that people, anyone with power, they generally will take advantage of that. And Naomi Klein outlined that brilliantly in that book,
Yeah,
right.
And it's about an emotional worn down. And we have seen how this word strategic redundancies and strategic initiatives have been taken to have people been made redundant. Anna, would you want to bring in one of our other guests there on this as well?
Yes, Claire. I think Claire is going to come in now. Claire, what are your views on the government using this COVID crisis to feather the nests of their corporate cronies?
Yeah, well, there's nothing new there, Anna. Like, for instance, like CRH, or Ireland's most profitable company, last year they had a turnover of 18 billion euros. They're Ireland's biggest company. And I suppose there's a real hidden agenda. Like, I'm just focusing on Irish Cement now as an example, but they want to turn their cement factories into lucrative industrial incinerators, and they want to get paid to burn toxic waste, and cement becomes a byproduct. And the initiative is being led by cement factory. It's not being led, by cement factory veterans. They've hired executives from the waste industry to drive huge increases in their profits, and where our health and the health of our children is no longer part of the equation. So I suppose there's nothing new there. It's always been the case that big business, like the government, and protects big business. Like, I don't think that there's any breaking news there. It's always been that case, in my opinion.
Right. And one of the things that the various government ministers and the Taoiseach and indeed the Taoiseach keep repeating is that COVID is going to be around for a long time until we get a vaccine. And of course, the vaccines are being manufactured by big multinational companies. Do you think that there might be a danger that profit might override public health when it comes to this issue?
I think. Sorry.
Yes.
I think all of our services are driven by profit. There is, even the principles of profit. Of course, profit. Everything is profit driven. The idea of public service. Hello.
Yes.
What we're actually seeing as well as part of a neoliberal or free market is, what do you do in a market situation? You actually wipe out, or you run down. You actually run down the competition. Look what's happening to our hospitals.
Right.
Look
Pat,
the way we've made housing into a commodity rather than a house. Pat, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah.
Well,
Pat, if I can take you in there now, what are your views on what we've been saying?
Well, and we all know that big business will be looked after no matter what. And we even saw that even before the COVID came in, when there were sanctions put on Anish because they were owned by Russell, by the US Treasury. You had the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach there. You had nearly every politician in the government as ministers heading over to America to get these sanctions lifted. And in the end, they got the sanctions lifted. And then once the sanctions were lifted, this company, Anish, were able to up production, and we all got damaged from that. The Taoiseach and them didn't care about human health as to what a surge would do, because all Anish and Russell want to do was to get back into profits no matter what. So look, we can make the case until the cows come home. They will be looked after no matter what. COVID will be used, something else will be used down the road afterwards. They will be looked after, and that is the way that Ireland has gone. We are so corrupt now when it comes to
that. That's kind of a very pessimistic outlook on the way things are. Would anybody like to come in and offer a more optimistic view?
Well, can I just come in and say that, look, there might be an advantage to this COVID, because people who were locked down started to look at your programs and what you were putting up on Facebook. And when people had time to look at things, because before they had no time, they were out trying to make a living, and rear a family. But when this lockdown came about, people were at home, they started to think twice, is there something going on here? People would question vaccines where they mightn't have before. And it's all thanks to the likes of you, and who's given a different view of things, an independent view of the national media. Without you, I don't know who else is out there that we can look at. But definitely, I would hope that people would have a different view now and would think twice when something will be forced on them from now on.
Okay. Would anybody else like to come back in?
Let's have a look at what's happening at the in terms of, they're saying the core to deal with this is trace, track and isolate. Well, it begs the question, that hasn't actually been achieved in the last 6 months. And only last week, the serial testing of meat production plants was suspended. Now, I would bet you my communion money that the reason behind, I would like to think it's inefficiency, but I really, can somebody enlighten me and tell me how on earth a government with 6 months and all of the resources at its fingertips are unable to get the most basic service into place? How on earth, and who benefits from that?
Well, I think at the moment the test and tracing is being done by the HSE, if I stand corrected on that. And there is a tendency in Ireland to run down services that are provided publicly, so that in the end people just throw their hands up in the air and say bring in private bodies to do it. So perhaps, I'm just putting it out there as a question, is the test and tracing being, the inefficiencies in it are going to be used as an excuse then to privatise that service, so that a private company can come in and make a huge profit.
Contract it out, because I think you have the point, because it's the whole part of the narrative is that if efficiency equals private.
I'd like to bring Claire in. I'd like to bring Claire in on this. Claire, do you have any views on this?
Yeah, it's hard to know, Anna, where it's going to end up. I know, like, Bill Gates is working on a vaccine very hard at the moment. It's hard to know, but there are loads of companies competing to be the first to get that vaccine out there, because they are going to make crazy amounts of money, because people are going to go for it, simple as, because everybody's tired. It's been on 6-7 months, the novelty is worn off with people, they're getting tired from it. So I think people are going to go for this vaccine. The majority of people will go for it, I think. Listening to what I'm listening to on the ground, people want it. There's a real appetite for this vaccine, and a real impatience as well for the vaccine, for life to get back to normal. So that's what I'm hearing.
Right, and I suppose it has to be there as an option for people if they want it. But the question that I would put out, will it be mandatory or will it be voluntary? If it's voluntary, Claire, as you say, people really, really want it and can avail of it, but and that's fine. But what do you think the chances are? And I know I'm putting you on the spot. Do you think that there is a chance that it could be made mandatory?
I don't think so. I think that would be a very, very hard one to make mandatory. I think people still have to. They still should be given the choice whether or not they want to avail of the vaccine. Many mothers will not give the vaccine to children. There is still a fear factor out there for certain vaccines. I know we're all encouraged now to get the flu vaccine coming up to flu season, and there's a real push by the HSE and government for people to go out to get the flu vaccine. So especially with vulnerable groups and the over 65s and the under 12s. As well. So I think it's hard to know. I can't see them making it mandatory. It's going to be very, very difficult because a lot of people are against vaccines as well. But I think the majority will avail of it, when the time does come. But it'll be very difficult to make mandatory.
Right. Derry, do you have any views on this?
Well, I mean, the notion that there will be a vaccine anytime soon. I mean, they're still trying to find a vaccine for AIDS, and that search has been going on, and that research has been going on for 30 years. Now, I know there's a lot more resources gone into it already. As regards the effectiveness or the kind of morality of, or the ethics of vaccine and mandatory vaccines or not, I was born in 1952, which makes me fairly old. But it was the last polio outbreak in Ireland, or in Europe, happened in Cork, in Cork City, where I was living. And, it was a vaccine wiped that out. But then my own kids, 2 of them reacted to the MMR they got, and one of them nearly died over it, So I have mixed views on vaccines, But the notion that we'll have a vaccine next week I think is for the birds, really, Because even if they develop one now, I know, and they're speeding up the FDA approval and all that business, but it's still a long, long time before, we're at least, if they have a vaccine or develop a vaccine tonight, it'll be at least a year before testing and manufacturing catches up, So it's a kind of theoretical conversation, really. It's not a way out of this situation anytime soon, I think,
And which roundly brings us to the end of that, Anna, where at the beginning we were speaking about, who is benefiting from this. And, we started in April from a position of cooperate, we're in this together, a sense of community. If I was to ask you now, how are people feeling about trying to live with this and buying into a roadmap or a plan that has been put out there last night, I would say that they've lost the plot in terms of they've gone to coercion. Where now I really don't know what regulation that's been brought in. I can't keep up with it. I'm tired, fed up, doing my best, seeing it's not been reciprocated. I think I might be the same as anybody else, saying, well, I'm doing my best, you guys aren't getting your act together. And hang on, which bit of this regulation, which comes across as very unfair, confusing, and as though they can't get their act together, which bit of this makes me a criminal and which doesn't? And how is this benefiting what we're actually trying to do? Live, they said, with this C19 that is here and now. Well, we've moved from cooperation to coercion. And I would put it out there that we need to keep a very close eye on the legislation, regulation that has been schlepped through. I know it's a part of what we're used to in Ireland, rip-off Ireland, etc. But this is the time. People are tired, fed up, and there are things been schlepped through there. I know that sounds a bit paranoid, but it's not. Look what happened with the Criminal and the Civil Law Bill 2020. Look at how in 1 minute the Dáil was suspended yesterday and then it was brought back again. Do you know what's going on? I'm certainly lost. I am certainly lost in all of this. There you go. That's my pitch for what it's worth.
Okay, Marion, thank you so much for that. And I suppose just to wind up our programme for this evening, I have to end on a positive note. And the positive note is that Derry Chambers, Cork Environmental Alliance, Claire Keating, Limerick Against Pollution, and Pat and Geoghegan from Cappagh Farmers Support Group are amazingly inspiring people that certainly should provide the impetus for us all to get involved and to campaign and work tirelessly as they do to protect our air, our water, our soil, our health, and most importantly, to provide a future for our children, a future that should be filled with hope and prosperity for our children and our grandchildren. I'd like to thank you very much for tuning in, and a very special word of thanks to Stephen Kerr from the Irish Inquiry, who has put in a huge amount of work this week to make this broadcast possible. You can see all the clips and cutaways and videos and so on. A huge amount of work goes into preparing all of that. So I would like to say thanks to Stephen. Next week, the spotlight will be on the future of farming in Ireland. So until next Wednesday evening at 8, Bannock Day Orif Golair. Please share.